Well, welcome to wherever you are in the world. And I'm mindful perhaps that in the last, 6 months, year, 18 months, you've been thinking about business schools. You've been researching business schools. You've been diving into GMAT and GRE tests. You've been sitting down with recommenders to talk about how they could perhaps frame your leadership potential, and then wrestling with these questions about what matters most to you and what these business schools should know about you. And now you've reached the interview stage. And if that has happened, and of course Harvard, that usually leads with round one, Harvard Business School has just sent out invitations last week to the first group of individuals, Wharton, Stanford to follow later this week. If that's happened, suddenly your chances have jumped forward. You know, we might be talking this year about 20, 24 people for every one place at the GSB, 11, 12, 13 people at everyone applying for a place in the Boston MBA classroom. But if you've just secured an interview, this is your chance to shine, which is why we thought in the middle of October, it was a great opportunity to bring together many of my expert colleagues from Fortuna Admissions to talk specifically about interview strategy, this moment that you have in front of the school to share your story. And I'm delighted, I love my colleagues. I'm delighted to be joined by Malvina Miller-Complanville, who was a former assistant director at Harvard Business School and heads up our interview practice at Fortuna. Rachel Erickson-He, who's both a Stanford GSB MBA alum and also a former admissions interviewer. And I love how Rachel talks about sometimes wanting to help the interviewee in that session together. Michel Belden, a former Wharton Associate Director, who of course has all of these insights about how Wharton has reframed the interview into a team-based discussion. So in the next 60 minutes, we hope that in looking and taking that deep dive to those schools, and of course, beyond Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, as you look at other M7 schools, other top US schools, the top schools in Europe and around the world, Fortuna has a team of over 35 former gatekeepers to these top schools. And if you're at that stage planning the interview or even thinking about round two at the beginning of January, please do reach out, share your story, and with all of that expertise, perhaps we can provide a little bit of insight for next steps and your business school journey. Harvard and Stanford, some of you might have already seen the deep dive that we took at the end of last year. Both schools produce every year this class profile that talks about percentage of women in the class, percentage of international students, average GMAT and GPAs and academic backgrounds. And we wanted to go a step further and said, well, where did they go to school? What did they study? Who have they worked for? Have they made a career switch before they showed up in the business school? What sort of positions have they held in the career trajectory? And it was a fascinating project with all sorts of insights about individuals that obviously reached that point of securing the interview and nailed that interview because they got an offer. I'm joined, as I said, with my colleagues, Malvina, Rachel and Michel, and we'll be looking at each of those three schools because each of them has a very distinct approach to the interview. Just as you are planning ahead, this is going to be an unusually competitive year. Already the schools that have joined us for Centre Court in the last week have talked about pretty much record application volume in round one. Kirsten Moss was with us last Tuesday talking about just how big the numbers were for that particular pool. We'll see how that plays. We have a presidential election just 3 weeks away, and that might open the floodgates to even more applications in round two. So people are hedging their bets. They're looking at lots of different school options, not just HSW. And a week from now, we'll have a second session looking at strategies for round two. And then beyond that, anyone that's at that earlier stage of their career, looking at the Masters in Management, Masters in Finance, or the Masters in Business Analytics, there is a program out there that is even more selective than Stanford's MBA, with so many applicants for a place in that program. So do join us for those following sessions. But now I get to hand over to my expert colleagues. As I said, we'll be going through each of the school approaches to the interview, what you can expect, and even the unexpected, how to best prepare, and they'll be sharing their insights and advice to really shine in the interview. Now we're going to start off with perhaps some broader advice that reflects the last 7 months. And I'm going to turn to Rachel just to make sure that all of those background details, Rachel, aren't distracting. So can you take us through those 3 areas that you want to make sure on Zoom or Microsoft Teams strike the right tone?
Yes. So first, the thing to talk about is your setting. And they are not expecting rate the room a 10 out of 10 with a fabulous background. But what they do want to see is that it is neat and that it is professional and there's no distractions. So it's fine. If the best you can do is a completely blank wall, that is okay. But like, get rid of the stuffed animal. If your bookshelf is messy, take all those books that are messy and go put them somewhere else for the purposes of the interview. Just make sure that your background reflects a professional atmosphere. The other thing though, is that if you do have to have your interview in your bedroom, that's fine. People understand that may be the only place where you can go for privacy. But once again, just think about making sure that everything is very neat and try to remove anything really personal from your bedroom so that it's a calm, neutral setting. The next 2 things I want to talk about are really designed to help make sure that the interview feels as natural as possible and as close to an in-person interview as possible. And that is both making sure that your face is fully in the frame, because that can sometimes happen where you're cut off in a way that just doesn't work. And also it's really nice to have the camera angle that's straight on so you don't get that weird view where you're looking up from below. That can just be distracting and makes it a little bit hard to actually focus on the content of what you're saying. And then of course the big question, distractions and interruptions. Make sure your phone is turned off or completely on silent, because that is not something that can happen during an interview. But if the worst happens and the pet jumps into the room, or your kid comes in, or your roommate interrupts, just take it in stride. We have all been there on those Zoom calls where this has happened. Either keep going if it's being handled, or if you have to, then just handle it as quickly as humanly possible and continue to move on.
So this is presumably why if you do have that stuffed animal that you've now left in the kitchen, your pets are going to come in. They think that stuffed animal is theirs anyway, right? So 2 birds with 1 stone. So that's setting and just creating the right sort of ambiance and environment. And what about you as a person?
Yes. So here the point once again is to try to replicate the in-person interview as much as possible. And for an in-person interview, for attire, we generally suggest business or business casual, suit and tie for men for business, and a jacket over a blouse or a dress for women, and business casual, a plain Oxford or button-down shirt for men, a blouse or a simple sweater for women can also work. And the main thing to keep in mind here is that no one has ever been rejected because their clothes were too boring. You really don't want people to remember what you have worn. I cannot say what anybody wears in my interviews with them. And that goes also for even more creative professions like advertising. Still stick with the classics, go with black, gray, navy, white, and very just basic tailored professional presentation. And the other thing to know is that it does not have to be expensive. It's not about how nice your jacket is. It's just about that you showed the respect for the interview to dress appropriately and dress professionally. Same goes for accessories. Keep them small, keep them neutral. This is not the place to show a big personality. That should be with your words and what you're saying and how you're saying it, and your personality. Face and hair, I know sometimes it can be a little hard in the middle of a pandemic because you may not have access to the same things that you did before, but make sure that it is as neat and as well groomed as you possibly can in your current circumstances. And then one other thing to keep in mind that may come naturally when you're in an in-person interview, but you actually have to think about in a Zoom interview is posture and eye contact. So you don't want to be slouched back. You don't want to be leaning back, because that is going to show on camera as really disinterested and distracted. So sit up straight. And then in terms of eye contact, be aware of where your camera is and be aware of the fact that it may not be in the center of your screen. So make sure that you look at the camera so that it actually looks like you're making eye contact with the person you're talking to as much as possible, just to be aware of that.
Presumably with spending so much time on Zoom or Teams or whatever, maybe taking a break before the interview, kind of just shake out. If you've been sitting and staring at Zoom to the point your eyes are cross-eyed, just going and doing something else for 15 minutes before you log on for this interview.
Yes, and I would also I would also suggest that you do all of this preparation ahead of time. Make sure that your sound is working, make sure that you've got the right camera angle, your face is in the frame, that you know what you're going to wear, that you videotaped yourself, and that you've checked on all these things, so that is not something you have to worry about during the interview itself.
Right. Now we smile about this, and sometimes, you know, have joked. Michel, you've talked about receiving applications when you're working at Wharton, and it had Harvard or Chicago Booth or another school, you know, on the why you want to go to the school essay. But you know, everything that Rachel is sharing, we've you know, had clients that were applying in round 3, where connectivity for the internet that had worked perfectly for a week, and this is the day, or you know, something sometimes beyond control. Schools will be very understanding if you know, someone's, I don't know, putting up a shelf next door, but trying to abstract from all of those things. And as Rachel says, preparation. Now, Malvina, I think that you're probably well groomed at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. So we're going to dive in with Harvard admissions interviews. And of course, HBS has sent out invitations to round 1 applicants last Tuesday. Talk us through just the structure and what the interviewee can expect.
Yes, so first of all, if you've received an interview invitation for HBS, congratulations. You now have a 50-50 chance of being admitted. And that admission will be based on not just your performance in the interview, but really the overall, your overall profile. What HBS is looking to do is to build a class which is as diverse as possible in terms of function, industry, geography. And so they're going to be looking at really your entire profile. But I will say that the interview is a big piece, and maybe even more so this round, given that there have been fewer opportunities for you to interact with admissions. So what should you expect? The interview at HBS is 30 minutes long. It's very short. It's very fast paced. It's, I think, you know, think about a dozen or a little bit more than a dozen questions. It will feel like a discussion, but a fast-paced discussion. People who have been through the interview are energized by the conversation that they have had. And something that's really important to understand is that the interview is really based on you and your experience and your profile. One of the things that sets the HBS interview apart from other schools is that the interviewers will have read your entire application. They'll have read your resume, your essays, your recommendation letters. They will have really spent time understanding what your background is. And they will even have done research on your company or the industry that you want to go into. And so that impacts the types of questions that you may have. So let's talk about that. And if we go on to the next slide. Okay, so what types of questions are you going to get? Well, as I said, the questions that you're going to get are really tailored to your own unique background. There is an element of the interview where they want to get a sense of your EQ and they want to get a sense of your communication skills. You know, are you able to communicate clearly? And that is essential for them to build a class which is effective using the case method. So anyone that they bring into the class, into the HBS class, needs to be able to communicate in a very clear manner. And that's one of the things that they're going to be looking at in the interview. But they're also going to touch on your professional path. So questions typically that are resume related, questions that have to do with leadership or management or your team experience, questions that have to do with your career vision, your industry knowledge, both your current industry and the industry that you may want to switch into, and any current events that may affect your current work situation or your future aspirations. And also questions related to school offering and how you fit in and how that school offering relates to what you want to do. So let's talk a little bit more about these. I think that, oh, I'm going to go back, sorry. Just a couple more points on the questions. One thing that I want to mention is that you may actually get questions on the recommendation letters. So it's a good idea to have a conversation with your recommenders, you know, and I think it's a good idea to speak to your recommenders after you receive the invitation and say, you know, thank you so much. Great news. I have an invitation. And by the way, can you tell me a little bit about the content, because I may get questions on this. And that's something that few people realize. And I think that that's something that is good to understand. Questions related to your professional path, resume related questions are not typically about, you know, you know, understanding what a consultant does, but there are more questions about understanding why you chose to go into consulting versus, you know, something else. So understanding the reasoning behind the decisions that you've made along the way and being able to articulate those reasons, those decisions in a way that's very clear and shows a logical thinking pattern.
If we tie two things together, Melvin, you sort of started by explaining that if you've been offered an interview, suddenly you've got a 1 in 2 chance. And inevitably, you know, we want to shine in this experience. But it is 30 minutes. It's not 35, 40, 45 minutes. You know, they stick to the 30 minutes. And you are eager to share all of these different elements. So as you're thinking about the sort of questions that they could touch upon, or even, you know, things that you would like to bring to their attention, you need to be very conscious with your time management and not let yourself run away with any one response and take 8 minutes for the answer.
That's so true. And I think that that's probably, in my eyes, that's the part of the HBS interview that is the you know, the tough part. It's the fact that you need to be concise in your answers. You need to be very structured in your answers. And even though you never want to sound like you're rehearsed, you know, like you're saying anything by heart, but you want to have thought through specific moments in your life that were impactful, specific moments in your life where you had to make decisions, and be able to talk about these stories that can help you illustrate when you showed leadership or, you know, a team example. Preparation for the HBS interview, I think part of it is being able to articulate these stories, being able to articulate these times in your life in a way that's very concise, and, you know, not searching for words as you're going through the interview itself.
Right. And
yes.
You sort of said in the beginning, of course, with the case method, the school offering and how it relates to you. I mean, that forum and the fast flow of discussion in a case method, you know, we've hosted events with professors and people are almost startled by how quickly the conversation moves. So Exactly. It is that ability to stay on message, say something relevant, pertinent, and then be ready to move on.
Exactly. And you know, this is something that you need to be able to do from day one, once you join the school.
Right. So the 30 minutes is done, and it will feel an intense 30 minutes. Enjoy it as best you can, right? Because at the same time, they'll understand if you're nervous. This is a high stakes interview. And if you feel that you fluff your first answer, you take a breath and try again?
Yes. I mean, remember, this is an interview about you. You know, they're really looking to understand who you are, what you have done, you know, what is driving you. If you're unhappy with an answer, you know, just, it's a conversation. You shouldn't ever feel that, oh my gosh, I've ruined the whole interview because I messed up on one answer. It's, you know, these people are humans, and it's perfectly okay to ask for a little bit extra time or to restate an answer if you're not happy with what you've done. However, I will say that one of the nice things about the HBS interview is that you do have an opportunity to reflect on how the interview went and to talk about that in the post-interview reflection. So the HBS post-interview reflection is specific to HBS, and it is an exercise that you are asked to do within 24 hours of your interview. And it's really an opportunity for you to have closure, so you can reflect on anything that you felt, went well or didn't go so well, or missed opportunities to cover some material that you wished you had had time to cover. This is the post-interview reflection is where you can do that. And I do think of the post-interview reflection, I think of it as like a post meeting memo. So if you had a business meeting and you would want to send a recap to your team, you would say, you would thank all the participants for their contributions. You would do a recap of the ideas that had been exchanged. You would talk about, maybe you would clarify anything that needed clarification, reiterate your excitement for whatever the goal is, in this case, HBS. And I think in this particular case, it's always a good idea also to remind the reader, this is why I would be, these are the key selling skills or key selling points that I have. This is what makes me a little bit different from the other applicants, and just remind the reader in the conclusion. I know a lot of people dread this exercise a little bit, because once you're finished with your interview, it's very, it takes a lot of energy to go through the interview, and then you feel that you need a little bit of a break. And I do encourage candidates to take a break after the interview, jot down a few notes on what was asked, what information did the candidate contribute, and then put those away for a couple hours before going back to it and thinking about how to write that reflection.
So equally, next day, don't set an alarm for 5 a.m. because you've got a client rendezvous, as best you can. But it is a 24-hour window.
It's a 24-hour window. And I think in some ways, this round is a little bit easier logistically. In the past, if you were interviewing at HBS, you would have been managing the interview, perhaps attending some events, dealing with your travel to and from your interview location, and on top of it, worrying about the reflection. And now, given everything is virtual, you don't have to worry about the logistics.
Right.
So that gives you some extra time.
Points to pull together. As you say, this can't be written ahead. It requires a level of spontaneity and relevance to the discussion of the interview. So if someone had been working away on their round one application, there's the essay, what more should we know about you? That's okay. I'll save all of this stuff and I'll just pour it into the post-interview reflection, and then even repeat some things that I really want them to know. No, this, as you said, sort of a post-meeting business memo reflects the discussion, perhaps 1 or 2 points, but don't try to fill it with lots of other information, right?
That's correct. And there's often a theme in the actual interview that comes out where the interviewer was really interested in a particular area of your application, and that's something that you can talk about in the reflection. But yes, it's not a good idea to write it ahead of time. I think you can tell.
If we're going to take advantage of technology, this has just come into my mind. Presumably the school hosting the call therefore has the opportunity to record the call. Nothing would prevent the candidate from using their smartphone to at least record the voices. So as you reflect, because sometimes a conversation and I can barely remember 10 minutes later what was said, you could record it. Maybe HBS will issue instructions for Zoom and say, please do not record the call, but that would be a way to capture and then use this 24 hours to reflect on the discussion that you had.
I have wondered about that. I'm not sure exactly, the ethics of that and where the school stands, and it'll be interesting to see what happens, if they actually provide some guidelines around that. But but it's interesting.
If nothing else, make some notes while it's fresh.
Absolutely.
Got it. Right. So HBS, we've nailed that one, and we're waiting for the good news that arrives in mid-December, whether the offer of a place. But we had other schools in the mix too. We've also applied to a business school in Palo Alto. And so Rachel, who has interviewed many GSB applicants, is going to take us through the GSB's approach to this.
Sure. So Stanford is pretty different from Harvard. All of the interviews are conducted by about 500 alumni around the world. And once you are notified that you have gotten an interview, congratulations, you will need to reach out to your interviewer to set up the time and Now the format, and they suggest officially 45 to 60 minutes for the interview. But I will warn you, you should probably allot at least 90 minutes, because if you get an interviewer like me, I very often would tend to go over because I was so interested in what was going on and what the person had to say, and really wanted to answer any of their questions. So plan on at least 90 minutes just in case, but expect it to be 45 to 60 minutes. Also, just so you know, it is a blind interview. The only thing that the interview knows about you is their resume. And for the interview itself, the main focus of the interview is behavioral questions. And these are all sorts of questions like, tell me about a time when, and then you should expect lots and lots of follow-up. Why did you do that? What was the reaction? How did you convince them of that? What do you think they were thinking? All of these details, sort of probing and trying to get more information about the situation. If you get interrupted a ton, that is fine. And if the person is taking notes, that is also completely normal. They really are trying to get a sense of particular situations that fit with what Stanford has asked them to look for. You may get asked to walk through your resume, but it's really mostly going to be in context of explaining things and explaining what happened, where, when, why, and how. You won't be told just necessarily, okay, take me through your resume. There may be some additional questions about things on your resume. Those are mostly just for fun. And then at the end, you should have about 10 or 15 minutes for you to ask questions. And one thing to keep in mind is that this may be the only opportunity you have to talk about why you want an MBA, why you love Stanford, why you think it's a great fit for you. And that's okay. You do not need to convince Stanford that this is your first choice. Stanford is more concerned about the fact that you are a good fit for Stanford and that you think Stanford is a good fit for you. You don't need to say this is absolutely my favorite school and I will definitely come if I'm admitted. That is not something that interviewers are screening for. They just want to know that you're interested, you understand the school, you get what it's about, and that you know that it's a good fit. And then finally, just one important thing, of course, send an email thank you note. It does not have to be as extensive as a HBS post-interview reflection. In fact, it probably won't be, but just make sure that you do send a thank you note.
Great. Now, a couple of things before we move on, because you know, I love the fact, Rachel, you described when you were interviewing candidates, you know, sometimes you were just rooting for them, and would even, you know, frame a question so that they could sort of shine in their response. I guess as you would have met candidates pre-pandemic where you're based, so you know, East Coast and someone within a radius. As we move to Zoom, and Kirsten commenting last week, it does give us a little bit more geographic freedom. So there could be an element of them matching you with someone in your industry or background. So a conversation can get quite deep into perhaps some shared professional background or other reason that they've connected you with that individual, right?
Yes, so I'm based in New York, so there was actually always a lot of choice in who they put the interview and the interviewer with. And I definitely tended to get people that I was really excited to interview. I got a lot of people in non-traditional backgrounds because I had some non-traditional work experience myself. They really, I think if they have the opportunity, it's going to be interesting to see this year. I think they are going to try to do some interesting matches. So be prepared for your interviewer to maybe know a lot about your profession. But on the flip side, especially if you're doing something that's pretty unusual, they may know nothing about it and you have to explain everything.
And don't panic, you were generous with your time, but if it's 45 minutes, it could have still been a very intensive and great experience, right?
Yeah, just, I mean, literally be prepared for 45 minutes to 90 minutes and anything in between, because you have no idea what kind of interviewer you are going to get.
Got it. So now we know what to expect. What are they looking for?
Okay, so the interviewers are really looking for two things and only two things. And this goes back to why what you were wearing and all of that stuff should fade away, and it really is about you. They're looking for your personality and your cultural fit, And then they are also looking at how you answer the behavioral questions. So in terms of personality and cultural fit, it's the presence, your poise, your communication skills. And then in terms of cultural fit, they want to know that you really have that Stanford vibe, which, you know, friendliness, enthusiasm, you know, are you confident but not arrogant? And are you nice? Are you someone that when they look at you, you know, okay, yeah, this is somebody that I think would be a great classmate to have. That's what they're looking for. They want to make sure that that is true for you. Having said that, that's true for, at this point, probably most of the people that they're interviewing. I mean, these people are all great. They're all amazing. And so the question is what else and what really stands out? And this is how you answer the behavioral questions. And so the questions usually start with, tell me about a time when, but they're looking for four, I'd say, key different areas. They're looking for situations where you've made a positive impact. They're looking for your strategic insight or your strategic thinking. And if you've had a job where maybe you don't really do that as part of your work, maybe you're in the military or something where it's really not in your scope, they may ask you questions about your industry in general or your organization in general and ask you to reflect strategically on that as a broader area. Then they also want to know about hardships, difficult things, challenges, things that aren't easy that you've still managed to succeed at, to show that resilience and to show that you really are, you know, a special person who can make a difference. And then finally, influence, persuasion, and motivation, all of those hallmarks of a good leader. You know, how are you able to communicate with people and make a difference in your interactions with them? If you want to know what they are looking for specifically and how they're thinking about those characteristics, just look at the recommenders checklist, read through the characteristics there, and read through to the descriptions of those characteristics and think about those, because that's actually, you know, sort of my best advice in terms of what they're looking for. Is they're not trying to hide it. They're showing it to you right there. Those are the things that they care about. Those are the things that they think make a good leader. And they're making it clear. And the interview is really about giving you the opportunity to show those things. So as Matt said, usually your interviewer is reading for you. The interviewer is designed to bring out the best in you and to give you a chance to show those things. It's not designed to be a gotcha interview. It really, they want to see you succeed and they want to see you give them answers that are like, wow, that's great. I can't believe you did that. That's really amazing. Wow. You know, I also just want to say that if you're nervous at the beginning of the interview, even if your voice is shaking a little bit, that is okay. Take a deep breath, get into it, go with the flow. It really is about the answers to the behavioral questions. And I have had interviews where, you know, at first I wasn't sure what I thought of the person, but as the interview went on and they answered my questions and I learned about what they had done in their work environment, I was really impressed, and that was what I took away from the interview, and that was what I wrote my evaluation on. So a couple of do's and don'ts. Don't use we. This is about you, so don't talk about what your team did, talk about what you did. And then also make sure that you do focus on your professional experience, and it is fine to talk about past jobs and present jobs, but don't spend too much time talking about what happened in college or extracurriculars or summer internships. Really do try to keep it the majority of your time on your work experience.
Got it.
And
So there's,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, go ahead, because I think there was another do or a don't.
No, that was it for the do's and don'ts. I just, so go ahead and ask your question.
So you know, this sort of humility, because the incoming class, they have what, a 3.8 GPA average. Stanford knows that you're smart, and it's actually, and you give the example of sort of conflict or setbacks, it's not that they expect everything has been one success that has led to another. They're going to learn as much about you in a situation that was particularly challenging that's how they get a sense of you, your resilience, perhaps an innovative way that you found to get around that?
Yeah, those are often the most interesting interviews, and the best interviews is where they have had a lot of challenges and you are able to talk about how you overcame those challenges and how you dealt with them, and show that you have really made a difference. But at the same time, I just want to say that if you are somebody who's had a great work environment and you haven't had those incredibly difficult problems, that is also fine. Just to counterbalance it, then you should be able to show that you've had a really positive impact, and where you really have helped things, and maybe you've taken something that's good and you've gotten it to great. And that is an equally valid way to show what they really, really care about, which is, you know, as they say, they want to know that you have made a difference in the organizations that you have been in, and that difference has been important and meaningful and impactful.
So now we'll have hundreds of people saying, yeah, what was my recommender supposed to talk about? What was that checklist? Now, Wharton has invested a considerable amount of time and thought in creating what they've described as a team-based discussion. Michel, of course, in your time at Wharton, you met many great candidates. I'm sure recognize some of those situations, you know, take a breath, have a glass of water, you know, wanting to see them shine in that experience. Now, why have they adopted the TBD? What do you think they're really gaining and getting out of this?
Yeah, I think Wharton has a very different perspective in the sense of, let's go ahead and move to a team-based discussion to really model what the students are doing, you know, at campus. You know, the really team-based, collaborative environment and education. So let's see how you perform in this environment with others that are kind of in the same spot as you. So they did introduce this. It's been about 8 years now. We are moving to the virtual aspect of it that we'll get into, but I think they really want to give you the opportunity and enable you to demonstrate how you approach, you know, challenges, working with others, coming to an agreement, you know, thinking about different people's ideas. So really take this as your opportunity to what would you bring to your future group at Wharton. So I think it's really a great opportunity, and it's clearly been working for Wharton that they've continued to use it.
Right, so this is kind of like the fast forward. They're projecting you into that dynamic discussion on the Philadelphia campus and seeing how you'll perform. So let's see, how do they structure it?
Yeah. So what to expect, and we're looking to go into the virtual, you know, team-based discussion. So it is going to be conducted the same way as if you were in person, except you're going to be now on a Zoom platform. They are still 35-minute team-based discussions. You're in a group of about 5 to 6 other candidates. So the new thing is they are suggesting that you join the Zoom call about 10 minutes prior to your scheduled start time. One, as Rachel had mentioned before, to make sure you can connect well, that everything is working all right, as well as to introduce yourself to the other people that you'll be doing the team-based discussion with. So I think it is a great opportunity to get all the kinks out of the virtual aspects, and also to be able to introduce yourself to each other before the admissions committee member comes on to, you know, facilitate the process. So I think that's great. They also definitely recommend, as in person, you can bring prepared notes. So you can have prepared notes with you, as well as have a pen and paper, jotting down everyone's name or taking notes during it. But they did make a note that the chat feature is disabled. I know you spoke with Malvina about recording. I do know that I believe that they are going to ask you to turn off any other devices during the team-based discussion, that they'll provide you those details.
Well, just on that point, you know, people are sending in some great questions that we're going to come back to, some really, really good questions. One I had never thought about. It's but someone has pointed out HBS does ask you not to record. So thank you, viewers, for being as informed as you are. Now, in the old days, you know, you'd get on the on the Acela and head to Philadelphia, and even before you got into the campus, and in that mindset, you know, being smiling, gracious to individuals at the reception, someone that holds the door for you. I mean, it starts before the formal TBD. And do you see something similar with those 10 minutes before the session starts?
Absolutely, I totally agree. I think it's from that first moment, being, you know, introducing yourself, taking a moment to jot down the other people's names, and that initial, you know, how you are portraying yourself. Nice, polite, you know, excited about the opportunity, take the deep breath. But, you know, it's kind of exciting. It's nerve-wracking, but at the same time, you want to, I will say 99% of the time, everyone that is there is ready to give their best, right? They are looking, are you polite? Or, you know, as Rachel also said, you know, are you that nice person, the cultural fit? So that definitely, I think from that first moment, you just introduce yourself to the other people that you'll be working with. I think it's quite important.
And these are not your competitors. It's very possible that the school will come away from this and say, we want all 6 of those individuals. So you don't need to be second guessing and saying, hey, I need to outshine each and every one of the other people on this Zoom.
Absolutely. It's, you know, be confident. What are you bringing to the team? So like you said, everyone could be bringing something so amazing and interesting. Absolutely. So these are your future potential classmates. So really, how would you work together? So I agree that outlook and that perspective that you take going into it is quite important. So being mindful of that we're in this together, let's all do a great job, and really shine as a team. Like, how great would that be?
Well, let's see your advice to then shine and prepare this.
Right. So every year they do have a new prompt. So you'll be provided when you are invited to interview what that prompt is for the year. So you will create a 1-minute pitch. So what this is that they are going to ask you a question, and your team is going to have to come together and collaborate and think about, this is the proposal that we'll give at the end of the 35 minutes. So working backwards, you want to take that minute to prepare, one, give a brief introduction about yourself, as well as what your proposal is for the prompt. I will say keep it as much to a minute as possible. You only have 35 minutes if there are 6 people in your team. Obviously, 6 minutes are already gone. And be really mindful that you all are trying to give your quick pitch and then come together. So then after you give your pitch, be ready though, when you're preparing for the team-based discussion, if your idea is selected, or multiple ideas depending on what the question is. So you're ready, like I said, if you have notes with you, good to go deeper, to really give them more insight of, oh, this is the person I would choose as a speaker and why. You know, this is what I was thinking that we could put together. This is the location. So if they really pick you to be the point person, or your idea is selected, that you're ready to really speak to that, you know, in greater depth. So to really be that go-to person. So that's kind of preparing for the prompts that you are provided.
And not sulking if it's not yours, but being ready if it is. So
Absolutely.
how do we really perform in this 35-minute session?
Yeah, so really it's, and like you said earlier, I think it's about how you all are working together, collaborating, your collaborative leadership. What role do you take within the team? So they really do care about how you are presenting yourself, right? We talk about communication skills, you know, your level of engagement. And I always say, it's not about exactly what you're saying, but how are you saying it? So really to show those skills that you have to help your team move forward towards an outcome. How do you toss the ball to the other people in the team? If I see, you know, Matt over there really hasn't spoken up since his pitch, bringing him into the conversation and engaging everyone, especially on Zoom. I think it's a little bit different. You can't read the body language as you could if we were in the same room together, but at the same time, really being a good listener, you know, really saying, Matt, that was a great idea. You know, I really love that. It's also okay, I will tell you on the other hand, if you want to question someone or ask them to go, can you tell me a little bit more about that idea? So again, that engagement. And then like you mentioned, being adaptable. It is okay if your idea was not selected, and being willing to very quickly give up your idea and get on board with whatever was adopted. So really showing that you're able to adapt and be supportive of whatever the best idea the group has come to agree upon. So I really believe, I think those different elements, and that's why I said, really be at this point that you know that they've liked what they've seen in your application. You've been invited, they see a good fit. So now really, you know, enjoy this moment, really embrace it, be yourself as much as possible. And I think you'll shine, absolutely.
And now this last point, I guess, you know, when it used to be a face-to-face, or you're all in the same room, whether that ability to read body language and feel that someone's, you know, less engaged, or just that consciousness, you know, Jessica hasn't spoken in fact, you know, Matt won't stop talking. I'm waiting for Joe Biden to put me back in my box. But, you know, this idea of encouraging others, it's not like we have a time clock on Zoom that says, you know, Rachel's spoken for 5 minutes, Malvina for 4, and therefore we need to give them and that's tricky, right? Just to keep a sense on Zoom of how everybody else is also participating.
Absolutely. I think there is this sense of you do as a team first need to take on being able to track the time that you have, that 35 minutes. You will want to make sure you leave, I'll say, approximately 5 minutes at the end for the team to give the presentation. So someone needs to keep you on point moving forward. Going back to Malvina's point, being concise. If you have something to add, don't go on and on, right? Especially if you have 35 minutes to really make a point and be really thoughtful about how you're saying it. And then, like you said, to engage others, I think it's very apparent sometimes that someone hasn't been engaged. So again, you could yourself take your opportunity to say something instead to share that moment with someone else. Oh, what do you think about this idea that we just came up with, right? So it is a little bit more challenging, but also to be aware timing wise. Again, like I said, if no one has to say I'll be the timekeeper, but at the same time, if someone does, that's great. And then just chiming in, you know, we have 10 minutes left, maybe now, right? So again, moving that ball forward, because to come for everyone to then be like, okay, so here we are coming towards the end. What are we going to propose? How are we going to propose it? And the other thing to give your best performance, I do highly recommend that you split it up. If you're going to give a presentation at the end, don't let or don't ask for one person to do it. I believe you're a team and you each can take a different aspect of the proposal to present. So keep that in mind. I think people aren't ever quite sure, well, what if one person wants to do it? Well, you could always recommend, well, why don't we all take a piece of it? I think that's the best way to go about it as well. So, yeah.
Right, and that sense of equity, you know, many of us have spent so much time on Zoom and other platforms in the last 7 months, but often might have been in meetings where there was a dominant speaker. Or that there wasn't that same sort of participative flow. So it's not enough to say, oh, I've done lots of Zoom, you know, I'll be ready to play a role. Maybe even, you know, being able to practice in groups, to pull in others, share without going for too long. It's a different kind of format that you're trying to excel at on Zoom for this one.
It is. I definitely think being able to practice is very beneficial. It kind of puts you at ease as well, but it depends who's in the personalities that are in your group. But like I said, I will say more so than not, people are overly polite and nice, but you could get that one person that decides that they have a lot of great things to say and they want to make sure they get them through. So there is this, you know, there's only so much you can do. And then virtually to be able to say, well, excuse me, or, you know, politely interrupt. But again, try to, you know, how would you in a normal Zoom meeting, you know, really take what role would you take and how would you want to really put your thoughts, you know, into it and make sure that someone doesn't overtake the entire conversation.
Right. Right. So you're not done. You've got that 35-minute TBD behind you, and then there's a one-on-one. Presumably, do they stagger it so the 5-6 people, or is it scheduled later that day?
So from what I understand, and just from round 3, because they had to go very quickly to the virtual TBD, is that right now I think they will put you in a waiting room. So everyone, I think, will be given a time, and I believe, which could be quite a while, that you will wait in that waiting room for your 10-minute one-on-one with the person that facilitated your team-based discussion. It is a very fast 10 minutes. Really, it's pretty much just be prepared to answer why an MBA, why Wharton. So you should really have prepared that. And in the sense of you have meaningfully understand why the MBA is important. It's pretty much, I would say, reread essay number 1 and what you said there, you know, and what you want to gain professionally. And it is then really an opportunity for you to ask them questions. So then be prepared to ask, you know, I'll say be prepared with 2 to 3 questions that they want to make sure that if you have any questions, that they can also answer them. They keep very tightly to that 10 minutes. So again, there's not much that they can cover.
So if you're in the waiting room, you don't run and get that stuffed toy for comfort. You just wait, prepare, and be very enthusiastic as this gets started. Now, I'm assuming that in all of these, the 3 of you have very patiently watched as I've tried to check on viewers' questions. We've got some fantastic questions, but then I'll take your slide to one before. There is no visual support. It's just you. Whether it's in the Wharton TBD or Stanford, you and the interview. We're not trying to share slides and check other people's questions at the same time, which, as you can see, is not a multitasking ability that I have. So, okay, well, let's see where I think I am trying to move on. Next slide, because with all of this, certainly if you already have your invitation to HBS for round 1, as Malvina said, congratulations, it's such a big step forward. And whether it's for that traditional MBA interview prep, whether it's for the team-based discussion that Michel was describing, or HBS specific, given that post-interview reflection, do reach out to this. This is your chance to shine and really for closure. Now questions. Now I can try to look at questions without sending our PowerPoint slides in every direction. This is a first open one, given the context and schools as they talk about diversity initiatives. Rachel, I'm going to put this to you. With speaking of appearance, what about making a statement like a Black Lives Matter with a pin, anything like that?
So I guess the question is, business school is not a particular industry or a particular profession where you know what the norms are. They're looking for people who will be generally acceptable, sort of no matter what type of industry they're interviewing for. So I would say that if Black Lives Matter is important to you, then that's something that should come up in your discussion and in your interview. It's not necessarily something that should come up in terms of what you wear, because once again, they really, what they want to judge you on is who you are and what you say and how you say it.
Yeah, I'd already figured I wouldn't be wearing my Manchester United shirt, so okay. Malvina, a question for you. You talked about the HBS interviewer that of course has read the entire file, and that is distinct from the other situations. So, you might have talked in your application about an industry pivot or switch. So the question, how much do we need to know about the specifics of the industry we're pivoting into?
This is a great question, and I'm actually really, really happy to get this question because I did want to mention this and I forgot to mention it. It's very important that you have a good understanding of not only your industry, but if you're looking to pivot, the industry that you want to pivot into. And I think, one way to do this is to do a SWOT analysis to look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, challenges of that industry. What are the trends, trends 10 years out, to have an understanding of how the industry is changing over time, and to be able to talk about how you're positioning yourself within the industry. It's also a good idea to be able to talk about the industry or any innovations or changes that are occurring not only in your own geographical location, but globally. So all of that requires some level of research. So for example, if you're looking at mobile banking in a particular, in Africa, you should look at beyond Africa, what's been done. You should look at even maybe other industries that have similar challenges and what they have done successfully or not successfully. But that, I would say that is actually, that is a significant preparation that you need to do. Another thing that I would advise you to do is to read the news on a daily basis, and just to be really familiar with what's happening in your industry and the industry that you want to go into. You should also be familiar with, let's say there's a big news item that comes out that's about your company, but not your department or not your function. HBS will expect you to have something to say about it, even if it's not, directly related to your team, because they do want to see that curiosity. They want to see that you have an understanding of how business works, and that you are curious about the strategy of your company and the challenges, and that's all part of what they're expecting.
With engaged citizens, I wonder if this year they're going to organize any interviews on November the 3rd. Anyway, just for introduction. But these are really good questions, and please, if you have other questions for the panelists, as we said earlier, someone's pointed out no recordings allowed. Maybe the next one for both Michel and Rachel, from two school perspectives, how the interviewer, the Stanford alum, or Wharton's team, how they're then reporting back to colleagues and that sort of centralized committee that are making final decisions. So Rachel, if we can start with you and how you would feedback.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's a form that you have to fill out, and it asks very specific, very clear questions. They tell you exactly what they mean by the answers to the questions. And you also spend a lot of time usually writing up what the person has told you and what you discussed and what the examples are that you talked about, and then your analysis and your interpretation and your assessment of them. So it's very, Stanford really does try to stick to one format for all interviewers and all interviews.
And beyond, yes, so beyond those standardized questions that they have, you then have also the freedom for additional comments that you feel.
Oh yeah,
they should be aware of.
You answer the sort of standardized question, and then you explain why you have given that answer in as much detail as possible.
Got it. Now, Michel, of course, sitting on the admissions committee at Wharton, getting sort of all of this feedback, and then you and Judith, Brittany, other colleagues from Fortuna and a wider team, you're then, crafting the diversity of a class. Would you be saying, well, we're actually looking at how this investment banker performed compared to this investment banker, or was it simply focusing on the candidate and what you felt that they brought to the interview?
Right. So for the team-based discussion and after the one-on-one, like Rachel said, they write up an interview report that gets put back into their application. And at Wharton, your application then is re-reviewed by someone new. So you get to see everything that the candidate had written, as well as what was the feedback from the interview. How did they perform in the team-based discussion, positives, negatives, and the one-on-one. So then, as Judith and I were then at the committee meeting afterwards, at a certain point, you're going to have to bucket everybody together, right? If we're taking the best consultants, but ultimately, how do you shine as a candidate on your own? Like I said, if you've gotten to the interview point, they're excited about you. They want you to be successful. How did the interview go? Were you someone that is going to really be that collaborative Wharton student with your team members, and what perspective would you be bringing given your background? So they definitely take everything into consideration, really a holistic approach. And then it will come down to really crafting as diverse a class as they can to really bring all those different perspectives and ideas together.
Right, and I'm just mindful, comments from other Fortuna colleagues who've said, sometimes you will come out of that interview, the interviewer was poker-faced, didn't give anything away, nothing of the warmth that I'm sure each of you would bring to those interviews, and you're like, oh, wow, really, really tough. But often, back in Boston, Palo Alto, Philadelphia, Chicago, they then tended to be your champions and said, no, this individual really shone and performed in the interview. So tempting as it is to sort of read into the emotionless expression, you could have done really, really well in the interview. Research, perhaps starting with you, Rachel, because the GSB is relying on those 500 alums, doing research on your interviewer. Perhaps that would equally apply to, well, Malvina, just very quickly, you don't know before you walk into or now log in to the Zoom interview with HBS, you don't know which of the adcoms at HBS you'll be. People have walked in and it's Chad Losey. And okay, that's the managing director of admissions at Harvard. But so you wouldn't be able to research. You might know some general things about the team. Is that right?
That's correct. And I actually, I would actually point out that it's a good idea to make sure that you catch your interviewer's name, because you will want to use it in your post-interview reflection. And especially, using these virtual platforms, you're not going to get a card, obviously. So you just want to make sure that you get the person's name, and if it's not clear, feel free to ask again for the person to repeat their name.
It's Chad and not Chaz.
Yeah, you should know that name though.
Rachel, in your case, and 500 high-performing profiles, and you might be interviewing with one of them. Appropriate, advised to research your interview? Sure.
So, people do it. if you are doing anything other than LinkedIn, don't let your interviewer know that. Don't ask a question about, oh, I saw that you gave these political donations online, or something that's on their Instagram or their Twitter. If it's on the LinkedIn profile, I think it is appropriate or not inappropriate to ask about it if it's something that really interests you. But any other information you have, just keep to yourself and use without making it clear that you know it.
Right. So all of that information we have from the Securities Exchange Commission, we keep to ourselves.
Yeah.
And a question about tricky questions that could come up. And I don't know, Michel, in the 10 minutes of that one-to-one with Wharton, if they're trying to trick you, and we'll start with you. And Malvina, again, if there is a question that catches you off guard, it's not how many beans are in the jar, but how you can very calmly answer that question. So Michel, no trick questions in the 10 minutes, right?
I would say no trick questions in the 10 minutes.
Okay. But Harvard, we've got 30 minutes, so there's 3 times the chances of a trick question. Or just unexpected, perhaps, Malvina. So what's your advice for that sort of composure and what they're looking for?
I think it's more about unexpected questions than it would be about tricky questions. They're not looking to trick you into, into giving a bad answer. That's really not the goal. I think that part of it is understanding what the interviewer is trying to get in terms of information about you. Tricky questions could be questions that have to do with failure, challenges, times when you showed, or weaknesses, times when you were not your best. And there are ways to talk about these things to portray you in a light that can be more positive, and that would be to focus on what you've learned from the situation. So. Not hiding any failures or things that didn't necessarily turn out your way, or decisions that you made that didn't exactly work out the way you wanted. Really owning up to these things, but showing what you learned from it and how you grew from there and how that has impacted everything that you've done since. And that's called a growth mindset. And I think that's a really great framework for those types of questions. Other tricky questions, or questions that are unexpected, sometimes people do sound overly rehearsed, and asking them completely random questions may be a way to say, okay, well, I want to hear how this person speaks naturally. So, what was the last book you read? Tell me about that. And that's just to hear a little bit more about how you communicate in a less practiced way, maybe. Yeah.
And as you said, reading the newspaper in the days leading up to, it's not that you need to know exactly the spot price of gold or a barrel of Brent oil, but perhaps, even just what might you say if you had no idea? It's like, well, in fact, reading the journal or the FT is something that I really think will feature in my experience at business school. How might you explain that you don't know how much gold is worth?
That's right. I mean, I think that, no one's perfect, and you can certainly say, well, given my background, this is not my comfort zone, but this is what I want to learn. This is what I want to get more comfortable in. This is why I'm applying to business school, and formulate it that way. I don't think that you need to, especially with those types of questions. It's not necessarily about knowing the right answer, but it's about being able to give an answer that is thoughtful and shows self-reflection, I think.
Right. We've got time for 2 more questions. HBS, the interviewer, has read the entire file, and if you have talked about how COVID-19 has impacted you professionally or personally this year, the interviewer will have read that. That's not necessarily the case, Rachel, for the Stanford interviewer, who will just have your resume. Do you think that COVID and how it's impacted you, might that be a question or a subject for interviews in round 1?
Certainly, especially if it's giving you an opportunity to shine, and if you've been somebody who's really stepped up for your company or your organization, then that is a fantastic opportunity to talk about it. And maybe you've been the person that's helped, maintain team morale. That's a great example, and something to convey. So that's one of the ways that I could see it. But once again, if you do talk about COVID-19 and how it's affected you, it will presumably, given the Stanford interview questions, be in a primarily professional context, and in how you have dealt with the, once again, this is a setback and a challenge for everyone, and showing how you have dealt with that challenge.
Right. I'd like to adapt the final question, and Michel actually put it to you in the context of a Wharton TBD, where they're bringing together individuals from all walks of life. And in terms of the expectation of any of the schools, there are personalities that are quieter. They have brilliant minds, and they're the observer and can then say that one thing that just cuts through. Somebody else, perhaps more bravado and personality, does more of the talking, and that's reflected in their professional lives. So as you evaluate applicants, the question was sort of, do the criteria vary based on their backgrounds? A consultant that's applying to school versus a doctor. Presumably you take into account those personality differences, and you don't expect everybody in a homogeneous way to perform in the same way in a team-based discussion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think everyone has a different role, and given your background, what are you used to? Like you said, are you a consultant and you're used to lots of team-based conversations? Some people aren't, right? Depending on your job. So I think it is still, what are you bringing? So when you do contribute in that team-based discussion, what is it that you're saying? Is it really quality? Does it help us understand your thought process? What are you going to be able to contribute? Just in this one example, which was why ultimately there's a write-up, and it goes back to your entire application and what it is your background is, right? Because they are trying to bring people from different backgrounds. So really think about, again, like I said, with your pitch, introducing yourself, what your specific background, media and entertainment, whatever it is, like what your perspective is that you are contributing given what your industry expertise is. So I've had people be very honest, and depending on what the questions say, I don't know much about that, but here's my idea. So I think that's how you want to approach it. And I think they are definitely very mindful and understanding as an admissions officer, watching and observing, that everyone has something different to bring in different ways. And I think that's something really to you yourself as you prepare. What is it that that role and what I can contribute? Is it my leadership style? Is it my listening skills? Is it my engagement of others? And I think that's how you can shine in that moment.
Just imagine if business schools just admitted people that already had all the answers. I mean, it would be a very difficult place to be. Now, I have not stayed by Harvard's rules, where it's always 30 minutes. I've actually leaned more towards Rachel's Stanford rules, where an interview can run longer. But I figured there were so many of you that have stayed. It's always such a pleasure to talk with my colleagues with the insights that they bring, and also just that sense of encouragement. This is your moment. You talked about enjoying this moment, because that's something that's going to come across too. So congrats if you're sitting on that interview, waiting perhaps for other schools and their round one decisions. We've got lots of content on the Fortuna website that you can check out. I think we've got Malvina interviewed by the FT talking about interviewing for business school. And of course, we've done so many interviews with the gatekeepers from the top schools. So thank you for sharing this interview webinar. Good luck with yours. Please reach out, and we'd love to talk about how we could help you. To Malvina, Rachel, Michel, thanks for a really great webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.